Two Jews, three opinions, says the popular phrase, or as elaborated by the late great Israeli author Amos Oz at the beginning of a public conversation he once had with the late great Lord Sachs. Oz said, "I'm not sure I'm going to agree on everything with Rabbi Sachs, but then again, on most things, I don't agree with myself." Someone who doesn't know us might think that a strange and uncomfortable kind of existence, but to those of us who have been around for a while, we know that an essential feature of Jewish being almost is the ability to hold on to two sides of a contradiction, to be a nose hafachit, I've heard it called, someone who can live with an idea and its seemingly opposite at the same time. We've discussed this in many contexts. We are spiritual people living in a material world. We are at home in Israel, whether we're living in Canada or Cape Town or Caracas. We work hard only to look forward to and find our delight in Shabbat, the day of rest that's an appetizer in this world for the world to come. Those of us who learn Gemara together know that the flow of Talmudic text has much to do with argument, or at least conversation. These see it one way, those see it another way. And it's never simply a matter of taste or opinion. These marshal their sources and teachings they've received from their mentors. And those on the other side of the argument do the same. Sometimes one party to the machlokes, or dispute, is able to produce a more compelling argument, while at other times it's left as teiku, meaning literally let the dispute stand. But how can you do that? We need to know, are we allowed or aren't we allowed? But it's also read teiku as an abbreviation for a Hebrew phrase, let Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi, come and resolve this dispute for us. In other words, you can live with an unresolved conflict for the time being. Nobody dies from a question, said the Brisker Rav famously. How true, and even more so, sometimes it feels like we live in questions and from questions. Our portion this week of Korach is famous for its machlokes. This great dispute between Moshe and his first cousin Korach comes to stand for a certain kind of dispute, very personal, rather petty, though no less righteous challenge. Simply put, Korach doesn't like that Moshe is in charge of the entire people, and Moshe's brother Aaron is the high priest. Korach wants a democracy. Everybody gets a turn to be in charge. In fact, as recorded by Rashi, this is what Moshe wants as well. Afani rotzebekach. I would prefer that also, says Moshe. However, that's not the way God wants it to be at the moment. Korach leads a rebellion that doesn't go well. He and his band of 250 insurrectionists are swallowed up by the earth that opens them and devours them in a fiery debacle. Very dramatic. Point is taken and the lesson is learned. In fact, some of Korach's sons repent and choose Moshe over allegiance to their father, and even go on to author some inspirational chapters of Psalms that we still read to this very day. The take-home message of this parsha is that there's a healthy way and an unhealthy way to deal with conflict and dissent and difference of opinion. It's not the idea of disagreement that's unhealthy and productive, it's the way we handle it. In her marvelously insightful and uplifting book, Reflecting on Numbers, the book of Bamidbar, Dr. Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg writes, the book is titled Bewilderments, that there's a great deal to be gleaned by how Jewish writers over time have engaged with this very idea of machlokes, or dispute. She quotes the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Yehuda Lev Lovi, who was rabbi of Prague in the late 1500s. In Zornberg's telling, the Maharal writes in his commentary on Rashi's commentary that the notion of dissent, or machlokes, stems from a personality type called a Baal machlokes, a master of dissension, or maybe even you could call it a schismatic. Apparently, this vice is a sign of over-reliance on total and uncompromising righteousness. Here, there's no flexibility, there's no ability to appreciate other views. Kulo din, as he characterizes it. It's all justice. There's no mercy, no compassion. That's a problem, writes the Maharal, because this kind of inflexibility brings destruction on a personal, on the person who's holding it, as well as upon others. That person's place truly is in the netherworld, which is where Korach winds up. There's no room for conversation. There's only eternal silence. That's who he is. That's who Korach is. He leaves no room for dissent. He's inflexible, unyielding, unwilling to compromise. Remind you of any era you know? The Baal Machloikis isn't really the one that initiates argument. He's simply right and projects that and sticks to his guns and doesn't entertain any opinions to the contrary. Zornberg writes, quote, he knows nothing of the yearning, the inner lack that reaches out to know another person, end quote. He has a quote unquote manic rationality with no metaphor, no questions, no incompleteness that words might be called upon to fill. He refuses to acknowledge the gaps, the differences that beset human experience. She quotes Chesterton, the madman is not the man who has lost his reason. He has lost everything but his reason. His mind moves in a perfect but narrow circle. By contrast, there's another model of the Baal Machlokas presented by Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, whom she quotes. This one exercises himself in open and passionate discourse. It's based on the Lurianic view of creation, that before the world was created, all was God. And at one point, God retracted, so to speak, to create a void and then projected the world, our world, into that space. Not everybody agrees with this cosmogony, but for this conversation, it allows Zornberg to say this. She says, scholars who allow space between words, ideas, spheres, separation, that allows something else to take shape. This is a healthy view of machlokas because it makes it possible for new ideas to evolve. Between any two who discuss or even argue, the space between them that allows the void or the vacuum that creates allows unpredictable insights to come into existence. She then quotes Walter Benjamin to say that friendship does not abolish the distance between human beings, but brings that distance to life. This too, she says, is Nachman's view of the role of machlokas, to bring to life worlds not yet seen. Korach stands in contrast to all this. He's not inclined to allow space. He's not curious what others think. He's not willing to have a conversation. He presents his demands, and it becomes everyone else's problem. Then Zornberg mentions the Mei HaShiloach's reading, Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner of Ishbitzer. The Ishbitzer says that what's missing from Korach is any sense of incompleteness. He lacks awareness of his own lack, or any void within him that would need language to complete, to connect, any conversation, to experience growth or even thought. He's so full of self, he's lost. In recent years, we learned about the Dunning-Kruger effect, describing a person of such low ability, expertise, or experience that it causes them to vastly overestimate their own ability or knowledge. They're so foolish, you can't explain. They can't grasp how foolish they are. Maybe parallel to the Izbicher's description of Korach. What Korach lacks is a sense that he lacks something. He doesn't know what he's missing. We used to call that guy a know-it-all. Actually has some depth to it. If you think you know it all, you don't ever ask for dissenting views to sharpen your own thinking. You don't ask for data or results in the polls. You never wonder how your ideas or your actions play out in the real world. It's a toxic combination of overconfidence, imbalance, and willful ignorance, not a good set of leadership attributes. Even more, the awareness of incompleteness, the recognition of gaps, or even wounds in ourselves and others, is what lies behind care, creativity, reaching towards others, opening dialogue, healthy and productive conversation, and even machlokas, respectful difference of opinion. We start conversations with others to gauge the distance between ourselves and them, and then to work on bridging those distances. That's not Korach's view. He chooses disengagement instead of response. And the divine response to his refusal to engage is certainly a catastrophic punishment, no doubt. But Zornberg also wants to notice that it's a mouth that opens up in the earth and swallows him and his band of rebels. Korach's refusal to engage in dialogue is brought to the fore, in case he didn't catch the reference, by a mouth, the mouth of the earth that opens and engulfs all of them. The mouth, according to Pirkei Avos, this mouth was created on the sixth day of creation, Bein Hashmashos, at dusk, in that transitional space between day and night, between weekday and Shabbat. As contrasted with Korach's unitary vision of the world without gaps, without contrasts, without any difference between him and Moshe, who, after all, they're members of the same tribe and clan. The time of indeterminacy, the fissure or crack between the clarity of day and the darkness of night, the gap in time between Friday and Shabbat is just the moment when the crack in the earth has created the one that one day will eventually consume Korach's rebellion and its ignorance and lack of interest in subtlety and dialogue and possibility. So let's think about the story of Korach a little bit in light of the world around us. Assertions of power, even grabs for power, it's nothing new. They're as old as human history and as new as today's headlines. Complaining about the management, that's so common it's practically a mitzvah already. Being unwilling to listen to the other side, now we're getting a little closer to home. There are books coming out these days with titles like Having Difficult Conversations, or I saw one that was called I Never Thought of It That Way. They are meant to try to help us bridge the gap between people who no longer talk to one another, can no longer tolerate one another. Like the madman, they've lost everything but their rationality, and their minds just go around in a very small circle. Maybe it requires more of an effort these days to maintain that open space, that willingness to give room for something to be created. And perhaps there's no time when it's been more important, as the Jewish people, to our detriment, seem to mirror the trends in society: polarization, separation, choosing up sides at opposite ends of the spectrum. Our hope and our aim is that we can still daven together, learn together, build a community together, even where there is dissent. We don't have to agree all the time, but we do have to stick together all of the time. All of rabbinic conversation is about respectful, humble, honest difference of opinion. As we learned in the past few weeks of traveling through the desert, we kept the Mishkan, the divine presence, at our center wherever we went. Each tribe, each family surrounded it with different views and different tasks, but we found enough to keep us together so that we did not drift apart. May we continue to find that togetherness even amidst dissent now and well into the future. A good Shabbos.